Astrophysicist Stephen Hawking, who's portrayed in the movie The Theory of Everything, says the Earth as we know it is doomed. The University of Cambridge professor made those comments while recording a BBC special to air later this month. Hawking was asked whether he thinks the world would end naturally or if man would destroy it first, and he said, although the chance of a disaster to planet Earth in a given year may be quite low, it adds up over time and becomes a near certainty in the next 1,000 or 10,000 years. By that time, we should have spread out into space and to other stars, so a disaster on Earth would not mean the end of the human race. However, we will not establish self-sustaining colonies in space for at least the next 100 years, so we have to be very careful in this period.
A Palestinian terrorist stabbed a 38-year-old Israeli mother to death in her home near Hebron this weekend in front of her teenage daughter. In a separate incident today, a Palestinian stabbed a pregnant Israeli woman in the Judean community of Takeo. Over the last 4 months, Palestinian terrorists have killed 29 Israelis and wounded nearly 300 more. As Chris Mitchell reports, an anxious public is wondering what's behind these attacks.
Throughout this wave of terror, security camera footage has documented the way Palestinians have attacked Israelis. Since September, they've carried out more than 100 stabbings, nearly 40 shootings, and more than 20 car ramming attacks. One way to protect people from the cars is these concrete-filled posts placed around bus stops like this one. Many wonder what's behind these indiscriminate attacks. One Israeli expert believes she knows what's behind the madness. Anat Berko is a criminologist, a lieutenant colonel in the reserves, and a member of Israel's Knesset. She spent years interviewing Palestinians, many of them women, who carried out terror attacks. While many blame what they call the oppression of Israel's occupation, Berko says it's often much more personal.
I found many cases that it was something that women tried to escape from imposed marriage, incest, or problems inside the family, or try to just escape from the house. And many of them, I interviewed many women, and they told me we have much more freedom in the Israeli prison than in our houses.
Berko says the Islamic promise of paradise often drives these attacks.
It's to go to a place that is much better, Jannah. Jannah, which means paradise. It's like for the males, he'll have the 72 virgins. For the girls, she cannot say, as they told me, I cannot say, I want to have sex. So they are speaking about to be one of the virgins, and if she was married, she'll meet her husband. If he was an abusive husband, he will go to Jahannam, to hell, and she'll go to paradise.
Berko sees a common thread in the terror attacks in Israel and the recent ones in San Bernardino, Paris, and Philadelphia.
But there is a problem right now that the West face, and they don't want to admit it, that there is something in this collective. I call it in my book, Shahada Mania. Shahada, it's the obsessive to carry out istishhad, self-sacrifice. And mania, you know what is mania?
Berko says in this battle, Israel and the West are on the same side.
The UN report shows that an estimated 3,500 people are currently being held as slaves by the Daesh terrorist group in Iraq. Based on the report, the captives are mostly women and children from the Izadi minority. They're also members of other ethnic and religious communities. The report warns that the terrorist group is committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, and possibly genocide in territories under its control. It also reveals that ISIL killed nearly 19,000 civilians from January 2014 until the end of October 2015.
Just 3 days before the annual March for Life in the nation's capital, a new survey taken by the Marist Poll and Knights of Columbus revealed some surprising attitudes on abortion. It shows 81% of Americans and 82% of the women would restrict abortion to the first 3 months of pregnancy. And 66% of those who call themselves pro-choice support that restriction as well.
And I think that that's an interesting thing to look at in terms of resetting the national debate in a way that actually deals with where people are rather than labels that don't tell the story.
56% of the women say abortion does a woman more harm than good. Even 33% of pro-choicers agree. 60% of Americans say abortion is morally wrong. 1/3 of pro-choicers agree.
It's the reality that we never hear about, and it's what this poll has shown us, that they understand what abortion is and that it is morally wrong.
As Hillary Clinton and other Democrats are campaigning for taxpayer funding of abortions, this new poll of nearly 1,700 adults reveals 68% of Americans oppose that, including 51% of self-identified pro-choicers. And when many pro-choice activists label anti-abortion efforts as a war on women, this new poll suggests Americans don't buy it, especially women. Across the board, those surveyed felt new laws can protect both a mother and her unborn child. That includes 79% of the women and 71% of pro-choicers.
The polling does show that this war on women rhetoric is a mere fiction.
And there is interest in having a number of limits when it comes to abortion. And both people who are pro-life or consider themselves or describe themselves as pro-choice agree on that issue.
One of the reasons for the annual March for Life is to push for such laws to protect women and the unborn. So pro-life activists hope as many Americans as can manage show up for this Friday's march.
It does get the attention of our elected officials, even of the members of the Supreme Court. They see the crowds. They know that we're there, and they are being told in a very peaceful, loving way, we're not going away, and we're going to insist on the changes that need to be made to protect the unborn.
To come together in unity, it really encourages us so that when we go home to our highways and byways, we can continue to work all year long because we've gotten our batteries recharged.
When we have the conviction inside of us that the unborn have to be protected, by expressing that conviction outwardly, by marching, by praying out loud, by being with large groups of people, it strengthens that conviction in us.
A pre-march rally starts at noon this Friday on the National Mall, with the march itself scheduled for 1 p.m.
The latest UN report details ISIL killings and gruesome public spectacles. People shot, beheaded, bulldozed, burned alive and thrown off buildings, and thousands held as slaves. The victims include government and public officials, doctors and lawyers, journalists and tribal and religious leaders, even women and children, anyone opposed to their ideology.
The kinds of violations that we have documented committed by ISIL could amount to war crimes, crimes against humanity, and possibly genocide.
Based on eyewitness accounts, the UN estimates that nearly 19,000 people were killed and more than 36,000 wounded in a 21-month span between January 2014 and October last year. About 1 in 5 casualties occurred in just 5 months in 2015, between May and October. But the UN says the numbers are conservative estimates because of the difficulty in tracking violations.
The number of casualties could be considerably higher than this. We were hampered by the security situation to be able to document exactly, how many violations occurred, how many people were killed. And also this only captures the people who were killed as a direct result of violence, as a result of suicide bombings, of murders and executions by ISIL, but it does not include those people who have died as a result of malnutrition, as a result of lack of access to medical care, and as a result of lack of access to the basic facilities that they need.
ISIL's brand of violence has been relentless despite steady losses to pro-government forces, said the UN envoy to Iraq, Jan Kubis, and even as a US-led coalition continues airstrikes against ISIL strongholds in places like Mosul, Iraq's second-largest city. The violence has driven more than 3 million people from their homes, and UN officials are putting pressure on the Security Council for more leadership, on the government to hold accountable those responsible, and on the international community to support Iraq's efforts in driving ISIL out.
Residents of Flint, Michigan went to the state capitol in Lansing today to protest tonight's State of the State address by Governor Rick Snyder. They blame him for not cleaning up the lead that has poisoned the water in Flint, a city of 100,000 predominantly African American.
What do we want? Clean water! What do we want?
Governor Snyder's address will have to compete with this.
Flint's come to get you, Snidey.
Tony Palladino and his wife Leah were among hundreds who boarded buses from Flint to the state capitol.
We are all affected and infected by this, and they need to pay for this.
It all started back in April 2014, when Flint switched from Detroit water to water from the Flint River to save money. Within weeks, residents began complaining about the smell, taste, and appearance. A year later, the city found slightly elevated lead levels in the water, but said there was no cause for alarm. Then in September, a group of doctors found that the number of children with dangerous lead levels had doubled. Leanne Walters started noticing physical and developmental delays in her kids.
We were told by the state nurse, it's just a few IQ points. It's not the end of the world.
Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha led the study on children.
When you first saw the results of your study,
right,
what went through your mind?
I think my jaw just dropped. How could we do this? And what was most disturbing was that it was entirely preventable.
5 days after her study was released, Governor Rick Snyder, for the first time, said publicly it appears that lead levels could be higher or have increased. A week later, he called for Flint to go back to Detroit's water system. In December, the governor's task force blasted the State Department of Environmental Quality, which oversees water. The task force said that complaints by Flint residents were met with aggressive dismissal, belittlement, and attempts to discredit the individuals involved.
The parents of children in Flint, Michigan have good reason to be worried.
There's real danger that the injury is going to be permanent and lifelong in them.
Dr. Philip Landrigan is Dean of Global Health at Mount Sinai School of Medicine. He's been studying the effects of lead since the 70s.
The problem here is that no level of lead is safe. Even low levels of lead, especially if exposure to low levels continues over many months, is going to cause some degree of brain damage to at least some of the children who are exposed. And that's a big deal.
Exposed children are at risk for a number of problems, including lower IQ scores, developmental delays, and behavioral issues such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Even after lead exposure stops, the effects can last for years or even be permanent. In Flint, Michigan, a major challenge will be identifying which children are at risk, then tracking them for many years for evidence of injury.
These children are going to be injured for life. They're going to need remedial education. They're going to need educational enrichment programs. There are kids who may be prevented from functioning at their full level.
International medical charity group Doctors Without Borders, or MSF, says that Yemenis are afraid of going to hospitals because Saudi warplanes constantly target medical facilities. It says Saudi warplanes have bombed over 100 medical facilities so far. According to MSF, Yemenis consider hospitals a prime target of Saudi air raids and avoid them as much as they can. On January 10, Saudi aircraft pounded an MSF hospital in Sada province, killing 5 people and injuring 10 more. And in December 2015, warplanes bombed a clinic in the province of Taiz, leaving 3 people dead. Nearly 7,500 Yemenis, most of them civilians, have been killed in the military offensive that began in March of last year.